in the 8th round, not the 9th round. I don't know what it says about the media in the 9th round, but the 8th round, which came out last year, it was very clear. It said very clear that most of the respondents trusted politicians more than they did journalists. That is very, very striking. That they would trust, journalists less than politicians. Now that says crisis for a second. If even politicians are trusted more than you. So I mean, this is the backdrop against which we have to confront questions about: is Namibian journalism still playing the role it should, as a free and independent and critical media that should play in the maintenance of and strengthening of democracy continuously? This is not just a crisis in Namibia. The media is as polarized in parts of the world as the societies, and they reflect the polarizations within their societies. The interests, whether it's commercial, political, or social, are pulling media trust apart everywhere, it seems. Media is being captured, co-opted across the world to speak or to carry the narratives of the powerful or the corrupt. And this is happening too in our society. This is unfortunately also the case here, where we can point to media houses, whether it's radio or newspaper, and know exactly the perspective, the narrative that will be broadcast, that will be transmitted through that specific media house. But there is still space for journalism, I would think. I think we have to be optimistic. I'm a journalist by training. It's my background. And it's something that I still dabble in, and as part of my professional identity. So this is something that hits close to home, and something that I am very passionate, emotional, become emotional about this sort of discussion. So to get us our discussion going, my panelists are from the far right, Mrs. Zoe Titus. She's the Executive Director of the Namibian Media Trust. She's probably the foremost journalistic and media advocacy institution in this country, civil society organization. To her left is Mr. Levi Katile, who is the chairperson of the Namibian Community Broadcasters Network, as well as the owner and operator of Omaheka Radio, which is a community broadcasting initiative. And next to me is Ms. Charmaine Kishiwaye. I hope I said that correctly. I did not know. Yes. Yes. Sorry about that. You can help me. Kashiere. Yes. I cannot believe I wrote that. Anyway. And she is a journalist with the Namibian newspaper, and also one of the board members of the Namibian Media Professional Workers Professional. Media Professionals.
Yes, the Namibian Media Professionals
organization. Yeah. Apologies. Yeah. Yes. So I mean that's the discussion that we will be foregrounding against what Dietrich just presented here. And I would like to start off with by asking Ms. Titus to give us an idea of where we find ourselves in terms of Namibian news media, in terms of this crisis. Where are we at this point in time?
I was struck by the Reuters report. Thank you, Federico. Because just as a disclaimer, the Reuters report reviews 2 countries in Africa, and on the basis of that, then assumes to speak on African media and trends and analysis and so forth and so on. I think things are really context specific. In the first place, it's a very small market, an overpopulated market in terms of actual media. So this market is not going to be able to whilst the smaller ones die down slowly, and this is what we've seen. This, what they would call, the major disruption in the media globally and in Namibia as well. It's more than a decade old. It's not something that started with COVID. That came with the digital transformation and then increasingly big tech growing and taking over ad revenue, which is the lifeline of traditional media. And then came COVID, which was for many a coffin, a nail in the coffin. And that's when we saw a lot of media going online because then everyone, as digital first. But we saw towards the end of 2020, 2021, very slight recovery in terms of media revenue. Then came the war in the Ukraine. Energy prices up, transport prices up, and especially for those traditional legacy media also dabbling in print outfits. That meant paper prices are going up, ink prices are going up, and the sustainability of the media in general it's a critical issue. Because if you don't have credible media, and I'm not just speaking about media in general, I'm speaking about news media that does the fact checking, does the verification, and brings you credible news. If they are in distress, then it impacts directly on our democracy. So, what are the trends going forward? I think that the push into digital will be ongoing. The legacy media, especially newsprint and the bigger broadcasters, are suffering. I think that newspapers will not die. I really hope they don't die because I'm a print person first and foremost. I think newspapers will become very niche, a niche product in the future. But our biggest challenge is the fact that digital doesn't pay. So what is going to happen in terms of sustainability? So we immediately need to look at new business models. That means diversification of the media product, new streams of revenue. Going into, I don't know, buy a car dealership or buy a shebeen, it brings in money. And if it can justify the fact that we produce news and information that people really need, then that is justified. The fact, though, is that increasingly the media itself, and especially investigative journalism, which is a very, very expensive undertaking, is also in distress. And if we are speaking about democracy and strengthening democracy, we need good and solid investigative journalism. Investigative journalism that is supported by strong democratic independent institutions. The other thing that I would probably want to highlight is that I don't think that young people are averse to news or seeking news. I just think that they seek news on different platforms and in different formats. I think young people are very, very much aware and interested in what is going on in the world around them because they are very active as citizens, but a different kind of citizenship that is disrupting the status quo. That was a very long.
Yeah, I think there's a lot there, especially in the FB. I think that we can engage with in greater detail. But I'd like to ask, maybe I'm going to dispense with formalities. We're associates, we know each other, so I'm going to address you by your names. So I'm going to ask Levi to talk to us about, there's more and more research coming out in places where local grassroots media have disappeared, that actually those media um, played a very important role in strengthening democracy at grassroots levels. And actually, just recently, this last week, I read something about a study that came out that shows how local grassroots media is very important in strengthening democracy at local levels. So, in terms of the community broadcasting in Namibia, which is still in its, coming up, sort of, how do you see this? What is happening in this space of what you're doing as community broadcasters and as a network
of the media that is actually very much unmovable. A lot of people, especially, Bantu people are so Bantu-centered, but everything goes or everything is done from Bantu. Unfortunately, we in smaller towns we survive off what Bantu does, and so that is very unfortunate. So a lot of people in Bantu, for example, don't know an existence of community radio in Orange, in Kunene or in Hobabus, in Kiermanso, in Orange, in Enana, and this actually covers community media in Namibia. Actually covers very close footprint that NBC also does. And a lot of people actually don't know this. We actually do a lot of work at grassroots level. When was it? Last week, we actually had, for example, the municipality. We're not going to get in trouble. The municipality of Kobaba is actually announcing community meetings. And we are a media partner since last year of the municipality. They announced community meetings taking place at various places in Kobaba. And they did that just a day before the community meetings. And as a media partner, we said, no, this is not right. How many people are you going to have in the hall? It's short notice. It's winter. It's like the most extreme of winter right now. You want to have the meetings at 6 o'clock. So and the municipality had to postpone that, so that's the role that we also play as community media. And I think we, in our various communities, actually do quite great work. But it's just we are actually probably not very much noticed. Of course, there's internal and external factors. I think maybe, for example, community media don't promote themselves enough. And maybe also institutions are also not proactive to find out what's existing out there that they can actually engage. I think institutions like NFT, DW Academy, and all that have really been partnering up with community media, they've always been proactive. And with the support and training and all that, this actually helped them, community media journalists, to actually be able to do their work. I mean, we cover elections, we produce election content, so there's quite a lot that we do with very, very little resources.
Shemaine, I think just adding on to everything the two panelists have said, in terms of, we see Dietrich sketched the economic circumstances within which media houses and by extension journalists operate. So can you give us a sense of what the conditions are, the working conditions of our working journalists, and how that impacts on the news and on how journalists fully occupy that role in society as part of their role in strengthening democracy against the backdrop of these working conditions, economic conditions?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I will start by saying that journalists are overworked and underpaid. I know every industry says that, but it's actually really true. And one of the things that we hear as journalists, you're passionate, but passion doesn't, pay my bills. And I think a lot of veteran journalists have always said that. As the Namibian Media Professionals Union, we want to change the narrative because for the longest I see journalists have heard that saying that, oh, you are passionate, this job doesn't pay, this is, like where you are at. And then every year you just hear about something, like, okay, I've been in the industry for like 9 years. So, but you would hear like, no, there's no money, no, we are like a startup, no, the economy and now COVID. And like, in as much as we totally understand as journalists, it can also be like on the spectrum of being excuses because, like, compared to other industries, compared to our counterparts in other professionals, in other professions, they would be like a senior journalist would be, let's say, getting paid like about 13,000, whereas news, somebody being out there like okay, citizen journalism, news being out there already available. And that is like really affecting the work of journalists. But I think a lot of media houses should invest in their workers. For instance, like the fact that journalists are not paid enough. I mean, there are so many journalists who don't have money to come to work. For instance, living from paycheck to paycheck, and that really affects their morale as well. I mean, we have so many journalists who are depressed, and it's not only because the industry is really emotionally taxing, but also the fact that you are really not paid enough to be able to come to work. We have seen this, these things are happening, and we really understand what our media bosses are saying that there is no money. But then you get things like, for instance, trying to diversify the industry or trying to diversify. For instance, the Namibian has now the radio, and then, like, as a journalist now, you need to push for every platform. You have to write for online, you have to write for the paper, and then you need to make sure you have something for broadcast. And your salary stays the same, for instance, and a lot of media houses are doing that. And you're like, can you at least just bump up something? Because now that will affect my morale at work. And these are the complaints we hear from a lot of journalists. We just recently we heard one of the media houses just told their journalists there are only two at the media house. Everybody else resigned or fired or whatever because they were not paid for months on end. And then now they're expected to, excuse me, now they're expected to be pushing out stories, edit the paper because there is no editor, for instance, and these are really affecting you. Now you are going to work, but you know you don't have food at home. And we've always heard this narrative for journalists that, oh no, they are drunkards. And they like to eat, we were having this discussion today, for instance, in terms of, when you're invited to a media event, and people would carry, like lunch boxes just to carry food home because that's how serious it is. And then you also want to have a drink, and people carry alcohol from events, and that is very embarrassing. And I keep saying it's very embarrassing, but I understand the situation that we are in. And this is a thing that our media bosses have been speaking, saying, no, there is no money, we can't do this, we can't do that, but we have to diversify. And then you're like, but I don't have taxi money, to be here. Like, I've been trying to push that thing of maybe work from home because the journalists can work from anywhere, but then they want to see you. And you're like, but I don't even have money to buy lunch, for instance. So that has really been affecting the work. And I think Job spoke to the fact that, the Namibian has changed over time. And it's a thing of, it's not just the Namibian, I think it's every media institution because the journalists are also like, they don't care for me. Why should I push out? It started out with passion, but for how long will I be eating passion? Because, I'm now here, I have 2 kids, I can't afford to pay school fees, I can't afford to hang out with my friends who are economists, who are, in certain industries. And really, I totally understand, but I think it's, time that just media, like the bosses, the editors, the media owners, and then they sit with us as journalists and speak to us, and we craft a way forward. We totally understand, and like when we speak to democracy, for instance, we look at, like I spoke to citizen journalism, but they are never factual, for instance. Of course, you see an accident happening, you report on it, you put it on your Facebook. But I will get the credible information. I will, get more into that and try to understand. Like, for instance, there's the case of the the gentleman who was killed in front of his house. And, everybody will just be speaking to the murder or, the murder that happened. But they won't know everything, like the extras that are there, and journalists are there to do that. But at some point, you're like, do I really want to do this anymore? Or I've seen people who are just like, I really don't care for this. I'm just gonna go to a press conference, I will write a story and I'll go back. And you're like, but like you want that motivation, you want that motivation to be able to give your readers more. But you are hungry. Like I will emphasize that. I will not eat passion as a journalist. I need an extra word, like I need motivation. Yes, there is no money, but what is the way forward? Can you at least make sure that you give me, a bump in terms of transport money to come to work? Yeah.
So I mean, I just want to talk about that, focus on that for a moment, what you've sketched here now. So, what exactly can you, this is the situation, the economy is not predicted to improve in any time soon. So, conditions will probably get worse, not just for journalists, but many other sectors before they get better. So, where do you see this going and what can be done?
I mean, Nampu, we are fairly new. We're still, crafting our way forward. But the fact that we exist is, fact enough that we are doing something as journalists coming together and just trying to find the way forward. We've been, as Nampu, the leadership, we've been meeting with different media houses, New Era, we've met with the Observer, we've tried to deal with the situation at Confidante. And we've really been trying to just forge that relationship first, and then we sort out our members. But the buy-in for the union, because there's been talk of unions before, and then there's been also like a union was formed that I don't know what happened to it. And then so it's like that buy-in that we need from our colleagues in the industry. And then but we are meeting the different industry, the different media houses just to craft the way forward. First, it's like an introduction, and then afterwards, we are going to fight for our members. Because currently, the obstacles currently that we're faced with is the fact that, even though we are doing work, recognition from the Ministry of Labor has really been like a thorn in our flesh because we've been sent back and forth, change this, do that, like all that. But that has not stopped us in our track in terms of trying to just get our members, because we currently already have members. We just, since we're not recognized, we can't just go budget and say, hey, listen, you need to pay your workers. But we are, just building that relationship with the media houses. And then, of course, we did address the situation, like at some point when Confidante didn't pay their workers, and our SG went there and spoke to the leadership, and then something happened. But of course, like I'm saying, like different media houses and Nampu should just sit down. We need to have like a workshop and just discuss a lot of things. I mean, one of the topics, for instance, is when journalists are covering protests, and then they are not adequately equipped for that. And I've always stressed that we need to just give training, and I think a lot of media houses and media experts have also spoken to that. So we are there, we're getting there, and I think we will be organizing different workshops as well, just to educate our members as well in terms of who we are, what we do, and then we also have in the pipeline a workshop on gender as well, just to address, because I've seen women in the industry, especially women, and of course what is it? Like the LGBTQ colleagues, they are really struggling in this industry. It's like a man's world out there. So we are working to sort of have that for our members.
Okay. Levi, let's talk about the challenges for community broadcasters. There's a very specific environment that a lot of our community broadcasters work in, and I've been talking to community broadcasters for more than a year now. And you get a picture of conditions on the ground. Some of the